The night my father laughed in my face, telling me I was too useless to ever run anything. I locked myself in my room with tears running hot down my cheeks. He thought I was weak. He thought I'd give up. What he didn't know is that in a few short years, I'd be standing on a global stage as the youngest billionaire CEO, while he sat in the crowd, speechless, humiliated, and forgotten. If you've ever had someone crush your dreams, call you worthless, or make you feel like you'll never succeed, then you're going to love this story. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around, because what started as a father's cruel laughter ended with the sweetest revenge a daughter could dream of. My name is Jenny, and if you asked my father, he'd tell you I was born useless. I wish I were exaggerating. But growing up in the Ward household meant that every ambition, every spark of creativity I had, was smothered beneath my father's voice, a voice that carried more authority than truth. Richard Ward wasn't a man you argued with. He walked into a room and silence followed, like shadows clinging to him. My mother, Emily, learned early to agree with whatever he said. And me? I learned to shrink. But shrinking never felt natural. Even as a child, I was full of ideas, scribbling inventions into my notebooks, sketching designs on scrap paper, building little contraptions out of cardboard and tape. Once, at 12, I built a makeshift solar oven out of tinfoil, glass, and an old pizza box. I was so proud I practically skipped into the living room to show my dad. He took one look, raised an eyebrow, and barked, "You wasted a whole Saturday on this? What's it going to do, Jenny? Cook imaginary food. Get real." The words stung, but what hurt worse was the way he chuckled as he turned back to his newspaper, as if my dream was nothing more than a child's joke. My mother didn't say a word. She just shifted uncomfortably and whispered, "Don't take it personally, honey." But how could I not? As the years passed, my father's words didn't soften. They sharpened. When I was 15, I told him I wanted to study computer science. His reply? You barely pass math. You'll never keep up. Stick to something simple, Jenny, maybe cooking or teaching. Leave the real careers to people with brains. By 17, I stopped telling him my dreams at all. It was easier to work in silence than to hear the sneer in his voice. Still, his dismissals became the soundtrack of my life. "You'll never make money doing that. You're too soft. You don't have what it takes. Stop embarrassing yourself." And my mother's silence. God, her silence was worse. At least his cruelty acknowledged me. Her silence erased me. Everything changed one night when I was 19. I'd been secretly working on a project for months. A prototype for an app that could help small businesses manage online orders using AI-driven automation. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. I poured every ounce of myself into it. My laptop overheated from the endless coding. My eyes burned from late nights staring at the screen. And still, I kept going. The night I finished the first working model, I thought maybe, just maybe, Dad would finally see me. Maybe he'd be proud. I walked into the living room, clutching my laptop like a lifeline. Dad was in his recliner, whiskey glass in hand, a football game flickering on TV. "Dad," I began, my voice trembling, "I've built something. An app. If I can get investors, I think it could really help people. I wanted to show you." He glanced at me, eyes glazed from drink, then burst into laughter. "You? Running a company? Jenny, you're useless. Always have been. You think some silly app is going to make you rich? Don't make me laugh." And he did. A deep, mocking laugh that filled the room. I stood there, frozen, my cheeks burning as tears pricked at my eyes. My mother sat across the room, flipping through her magazine. She didn't defend me. Didn't say a word. Just lowered her gaze as if my humiliation wasn't worth acknowledging. That was the moment something in me cracked, or maybe, something in me finally ignited. I didn't argue back. I didn't scream. I simply turned, walked upstairs, and locked my bedroom door. For hours, I lay there in the dark, his laughter echoing in my head like a cruel refrain. "You're useless. Always have been." And yet, beneath the pain, something else stirred. A voice, quiet but steady. Prove him wrong. By morning, I'd made my decision. I packed a bag with my essentials, laptop, notebooks, a few changes of clothes. I withdrew the $900 I'd saved from part-time jobs tutoring and working in a coffee shop. Then, before the sun even rose, I slipped out of that house and never looked back. Life outside wasn't easy. In fact, it was brutal. I rented a cramped basement apartment where the ceiling leaked when it rained. I lived on ramen noodles and cheap instant coffee. My furniture consisted of a mattress on the floor and a desk I found on the curb. But that desk became my command center. My war room. Night after night, I coded. I refined. I researched. I sent out pitch emails to investors, most of which were ignored or rejected within minutes. I went to networking events where men twice my age barely looked at me before moving on to the real entrepreneurs. I can't count the number of times I cried myself to sleep, staring at the cracked ceiling, whispering, maybe Dad was right. Maybe I am useless. But every time I thought about giving up, I remembered his laugh, that cruel smirk. And suddenly, quitting wasn't an option. Not anymore. After months of rejection, I landed my first small client, a family-owned bakery struggling to manage online orders. I offered to let them use my app for free. When they told me it saved them hours of work each week, I cried tears of joy in the privacy of my tiny apartment. It wasn't money yet, but it was proof. Proof that I wasn't useless. Word spread slowly. A boutique clothing store reached out. Then a small flower shop. Each success was like a drop of gasoline on the fire in my chest. Still, money was tight. I picked up side jobs, data entry, freelance coding gigs, even cleaning apartments to keep the lights on. But every spare second went back into my app. The hardest part wasn't the poverty. It wasn't the rejection. It was the voice inside me that sounded exactly like my father. You'll never make money doing that. You're too soft. You don't have what it takes. Stop embarrassing yourself. Some nights, that voice nearly won. But then I'd open my email, see one grateful message from a small business owner whose life was easier because of my work, and I'd keep going. By 21, my app had a small but loyal user base. Not enough to live comfortably, but enough to prove there was potential. Investors still brushed me off, but I didn't stop. I worked harder, longer, sharper, and deep down, I knew one thing with absolute certainty: every no I heard, every insult I endured, every ounce of pain my father gave me, it wasn't killing me. It was shaping me, forging me into something stronger. I wasn't useless. I wasn't weak. And one day I would prove it, on a stage so big, even Richard Ward couldn't ignore me. I was 21 when opportunity finally knocked, but not in the way I expected. I'd been attending tech meetups religiously, the kind where everyone's dressed in hoodies, sipping cheap coffee, and trying to pitch half-baked ideas to anyone who'll listen. Usually, I left these events feeling smaller than when I arrived. But one night, as I nervously set up my battered old laptop to demo my app, a woman approached me. She had short silver hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of presence that made everyone instinctively step aside. "I'm Clara Mitchell," she said, extending her hand. "Show me what you've built." I froze. Clara was a well-known angel investor in the startup scene. People practically lined up to pitch her. And here she was asking me. Hands trembling, I walked her through my app. I explained how it simplified inventory, automated online orders, and even handled customer messages. I showed her the bakery and boutique that were already using it successfully. Clara listened quietly, nodding, her gaze never leaving mine. When I finished, she said one sentence that changed everything. "You remind me of myself when I was your age. How much are you asking for?" My throat went dry. I hadn't even expected to get this far. 50,000? I stammered. She chuckled. "Jenny, you're underselling yourself. Let's start with 200,000. I'll take 20% equity." My knees almost gave out. With Clara's investment, everything shifted. I moved out of my leaky basement and into a shared workspace downtown. Suddenly, I could afford a small team, 2 developers, and a part-time designer. We worked like maniacs, fueled by takeout food and the thrill of possibility. Every week, new businesses signed up. By the end of the first year, we had over 1,000 active users. The app wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. But success didn't erase the memories of failure. Late at night, when everyone else had gone home, I'd sit alone in the office, staring out at the city lights, and hear my father's voice mocking me. Useless. Always have been. It didn't hurt as much anymore. Now, it only fueled me. Around this time, my father called me for the first time in 2 years. "Jenny," he said curtly, "your cousin Mark is graduating. There's a family dinner. You're expected to attend." Part of me wanted to refuse. But another part, the defiant part, wanted to show up. I arrived at the dinner in a simple blazer, nothing flashy. My father greeted me with that same smirk I knew too well. "So," he said loudly so the whole table could hear, "are you still wasting time on that little app of yours? Or have you finally gotten a real job?" The table chuckled. My cheeks flushed, but I kept my expression calm. "It's going well," I replied softly. "Well," he barked out a laugh. "That's not the same as successful, Jenny. Don't get your hopes up." I smiled politely, said nothing more, and let him bask in his self-satisfied ignorance. What he didn't know was that I'd just signed a deal with a chain of 50 retail stores that would triple our revenue overnight. The next 2 years were a blur of growth. With every milestone, Clara pushed me harder. "You're not just building an app, Jenny," she reminded me. "You're building an empire." By 24, my company, Streamline AI, had expanded across multiple industries. Restaurants, shops, service providers, they all used it. Investors who once ignored me now flooded my inbox with offers. And me? The girl who once cried herself to sleep in a leaky basement now stood in boardrooms negotiating million-dollar contracts. Still, I kept my success quiet around my family. Partly because I didn't want their validation anymore. And partly because I wanted the reveal, the eventual moment, to hit them like a tidal wave. On the rare occasions I visited home, Dad hadn't changed. "Still chasing that dream, huh?" he sneered once when I stopped by for Christmas. "Well, don't say I didn't warn you when it all collapses." I bit my tongue, forcing a smile. Because inside, I knew the truth. The empire was already built. The foundations were stronger than he could imagine. Every insult he threw my way only added to the anticipation of the day I'd finally show him who I really was. By 25, Streamline AI was valued at over $500 million. Forbes called me the youngest rising star in tech. I read the article in silence, staring at the words on the page. A part of me wanted to send it straight to my father, to shove it in his face. But no, I wasn't ready yet. Not until the timing was perfect. And oh, the timing would come. Because my father, the man who called me useless, who laughed at my dreams, was about to find himself in a situation where my success wasn't just visible. It was unavoidable. He wouldn't just hear about it. He'd have to watch it. In front of everyone. And when that day came, he wouldn't be laughing anymore. By 26, my life looked nothing like the one my father had predicted for me. Streamline AI had gone international. Offices in New York, London, and Singapore. Our platform was being used by thousands of businesses worldwide. I was the youngest woman ever featured on the cover of Forbes Tech Leaders Under 30. And yet, despite the headlines, my father remained in his bubble of denial. He still believed I was chasing some fragile dream destined to collapse. He hadn't connected the dots that the Jenny Ward in the articles was his own daughter. It would have been funny if it hadn't been so infuriating. One morning, as I was reviewing contracts in my corner office overlooking Manhattan, my assistant walked in holding a cream-colored envelope. "It looks personal," she said, handing it to me. I opened it, and my heart skipped. It was an invitation to the National Business Leaders Gala, a massive annual event where CEOs, investors, and politicians gathered. But that wasn't the shocking part. The shocking part was the list of sponsors. One name stood out, Ward Manufacturing Incorporated. My father's company. Not only would he be attending, he'd be on stage. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. This was it. The moment I'd been waiting for. The gala was held in a glittering ballroom draped in gold and crystal. Cameras flashed. Reporters hustled. It was the kind of night where appearances were everything. I arrived in a sleek black gown, every inch the CEO I had become. My team walked beside me, and Clara, my investor, mentor, and now friend, smiled knowingly. "You ready for this?" she asked. I smirked. I've been ready since I was 19. Inside, The atmosphere buzzed. Powerful men and women mingled, clinking champagne glasses. My father stood near the stage, shaking hands with board members, looking every bit the arrogant patriarch I remembered. When his eyes finally landed on me, confusion flickered across his face, then recognition. "Jenny," he muttered, walking over. "What are you doing here? This event is for business leaders, not dreamers." My chest tightened, but I kept my smile steady. "Oh, don't worry, Dad. I belong here more than you realize." He laughed dismissively, patting my shoulder as if I were still a child. Always the comedian. An hour later, the lights dimmed. The host announced the keynote speaker for the evening. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome one of the fastest-rising innovators in global tech, the youngest billionaire CEO in history, Jenny Ward of Streamline I." The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. My name echoed through the speakers. And my father froze. I walked past him, head held high, the sound of clapping thunder in my ears. His jaw dropped. His whiskey glass trembled in his hand. I could almost hear his words from years ago. "You're useless. Always have been." And now, here I was, on stage, standing under the spotlights, a billion-dollar empire behind me. The address. I stepped up to the podium, my voice clear and strong. "Thank you. Tonight isn't about me. It's about every person who's ever been told they're not enough. Every dreamer who was laughed at. Every girl who was called useless. Because sometimes, the greatest fuel in the world is the word no." The crowd applauded. I spotted my father in the front row, his face pale, his pride crumbling. I continued, each word aimed directly at him though no one else knew it. "When I was 19, someone I loved told me I would never succeed. That I was a failure before I even began. And that laughter, it cut deep. But it also lit a fire in me. And tonight, I stand here to say, to anyone who has ever been underestimated, don't let their laughter define you. Let it drive you." Thunderous applause filled the ballroom. Reporters scribbled notes. Flashbulbs blinded the stage. And my father, he couldn't clap. He sat there, humiliated, the truth pressing down on him like a weight he couldn't bear. When the speech ended, people swarmed me. Investors, reporters, CEOs. My father pushed through the crowd, his face tight. "Jenny," he hissed, grabbing my arm. "What the hell was that? You embarrassed me. You embarrassed the family." I pulled my arm free. My voice was calm, but inside, I was trembling with satisfaction. "No, Dad. You embarrassed yourself. All those years, you told me I was useless. You crushed my dreams. And now, the world knows my name. They cheer for me. Not for you." His face twisted in anger. "You think this makes you better than me?" I leaned in, close enough that only he could hear. "No, Dad. This doesn't make me better. This makes me free." And then I turned my back on him, walking away as cameras flashed around me. The night of the gala was only the beginning. My speech had gone viral by morning. News outlets plastered my face across headlines. "Youngest billionaire CEO shocks gala with emotional speech." Clips of my words spread across social media, millions of views within days. I couldn't walk down the street without someone stopping to congratulate me or thank me for inspiring them. And while the world celebrated me, my father's silence was deafening. He didn't call. He didn't text. He didn't show up at my office, though I knew every bone in his body burned with the need to confront me. For the first time in his life, he wasn't in control. He wasn't the one pulling the strings. I was. Weeks passed before I saw him again. It was my mother who called first. Her voice was soft, almost pleading. "Jenny, your father isn't well. He's been quieter than usual. Maybe you should come home." Home. The word felt foreign now. My home had always been a battlefield, a place where my dreams went to die. And yet, a part of me still ached at the thought of my mother, silent for so many years, reaching out now. I agreed to visit. Not for him, but for her. When I walked into their house, it was like stepping back into a memory I wanted to forget. The leather recliner, the faint smell of whiskey, the oppressive silence. My father sat there, older than I remembered, shoulders heavy, eyes dim. He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, There was no smirk, no mocking laugh, just emptiness. "You made a fool of me," he muttered. His voice was raspy, almost broken. "No, Dad," I said evenly, standing tall. "You made a fool of yourself. I begged for your support. I wanted your guidance. All you gave me was ridicule." His jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. For once, he had no words. My mother reached for my hand, tears shining in her eyes. "Jenny, he doesn't know how to say it, but he's proud." I pulled my hand away gently. "Pride isn't what I needed. Respect is. Belief is. And you both failed me when it mattered most." I left that night with my heart heavier than before. Revenge wasn't always clean. Sometimes it left scars even when you won. But life had a way of circling back. Months later, my father's company, Ward Manufacturing, hit a crisis. Poor leadership, outdated practices, dwindling contracts. For years, he had ignored innovation, clinging to his old ways. Now it was catching up. And guess which company was positioned to acquire them? Streamline AI. My company. When my board first presented the idea, I almost laughed. The irony was too rich. Richard Ward, the man who laughed in my face when I dared to dream, would now have to negotiate with me to save the company he'd built his life around. The meeting was set in a high-rise downtown. I walked into the boardroom in a tailored suit, my heels clicking against the polished floor. My team sat on one side of the long glass table. On the other sat my father, flanked by his executives, his face pale as stone. "Jenny," he said stiffly, as though the word itself cut him. "Mr. Ward," I replied coldly, not offering the comfort of Dad. The negotiation was brutal. His team tried to posture, to cling to leverage they didn't have. I sat quietly, letting my lawyers dismantle their arguments one by one. Every time my father tried to speak, I countered with facts, data, numbers he couldn't refute. Finally, the silence broke. My father leaned forward, his voice trembling with restrained anger. "So what? You want to humiliate me? Take my company just to spite me?" I looked him dead in the eyes. "No. I'm taking your company because you ran it into the ground. You underestimated innovation. Just like you underestimated me. And that's why you're sitting here, begging for help." The room went silent. Even his executives avoided his gaze. In the end, the deal was finalized. Ward Manufacturing was absorbed into Streamline AI. I became not just the daughter he once mocked, but the owner of everything he thought defined him. His legacy was now mine. Walking out of that boardroom, I felt a release I couldn't put into words. Years of humiliation, years of doubt, years of his laughter. It all collapsed behind me. For the first time in my life, I was free from his shadow. Weeks later, when the acquisition hit the news, journalists asked how it felt. I answered honestly, "It feels like justice." For every girl who's ever been told she's useless, let this be a reminder. The people who doubt you aren't your judges. They're your fuel. The public loved it. Messages poured in from young women, dreamers, underdogs. People who saw themselves in me. As for my father, he retreated from the public eye. He stopped attending galas, stopped giving interviews. He lived quietly, his name no longer tied to the company he thought would make him immortal. One evening, months after the deal, I found myself alone in my office, the city glittering outside the window. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was simple, just 3 words. I was wrong. I stared at it for a long time, tears welling in my eyes. Not because it healed me, not because it fixed anything, but because it was proof that even the harshest voices could be silenced by success. I didn't reply. Some battles don't need words. The victory is in the life you build, not the apologies you receive. And in that moment, I knew I'd gotten my revenge. Not by screaming, not by fighting, but by proving him wrong in the most undeniable way possible. Years later, when people asked me about my success, I didn't start the story with investors or Forbes covers or billion-dollar valuations. I started it with a laugh, my father's laugh. That night in the living room when he told me I was useless, when he turned my dreams into a punchline, that was the moment my story truly began. Because revenge, I learned, doesn't always look like screaming in someone's face or watching them crumble. Sometimes it's quieter. Sometimes it's standing on a stage, hearing a room full of strangers cheer your name while the person who doubted you most sits in silence. Sometimes it's signing the papers that transfer his life's work into your hands and realizing you don't even need his approval anymore. My father never apologized in person. That one text, "I was wrong," was the closest he ever came. And you know what? That was enough. Not because I needed it, but because it reminded me that even the loudest voices of doubt can be broken by proof. There was a time when his opinion was everything to me. When I craved his validation so desperately that his insults nearly destroyed me. But standing where I am now, I see it clearly. I never needed his belief to succeed. I only needed my own. The real revenge wasn't owning his company or silencing his laugh. The real revenge was building a life so powerful, so undeniable, that I no longer cared what he thought. That's freedom. That's victory. I share this not to glorify success, but to remind you, whoever's listening, that the people who call you useless are often projecting their own fears, their own failures. Their laughter isn't prophecy. It's just noise. And you? You have the power to turn that noise into fire. If you've ever been mocked, underestimated, or dismissed, remember my story. Remember Jenny, the girl who was called useless, the girl who was laughed at, the girl who was told she'd never make it. Remember that she became the youngest billionaire CEO, not because her father believed in her, but because she believed in herself when no one else did. So the next time someone doubts you, smile. Because one day they'll see. One day, they'll regret every word. And by then, you won't even need their regret. You'll be too busy living the life they swore you could never have. That's the sweetest revenge of all. And that's where Jenny's story closes, with freedom, vindication, and a powerful lesson.